He's a man who stretches across a broad spectrum of interests, from fashion to film, music to reality television, and who enjoys extraordinary commercial success. He's experienced tragedy in the murder of his best friend and the joys of fatherhood no less than 6 times. Now 40 years old, Sean Diddy Combs lives a life of luxury, but also one of relentless hard work. And this is how he does it.
Diddy lost $1 billion. Not over decades of slow decline, not through a string of bad investments that any financial advisor could have flagged. It happened fast. It happened publicly. And by the time the dust settled, one of the most powerful empires ever built in hip-hop was barely recognizable. For years, he was the blueprint, the name that proved you could start in the music industry and end up owning something far larger than any record deal could ever produce. Brands, businesses, equity, influence. He had built all of it, and the numbers backed it up. Then something shifted. And what came next is a story that the surface level coverage never came close to telling. But real quick, if you're serious about winning in the rap game, I put everything I know into one ebook. I'm talking how to actually grow an audience from zero, how to get labels reaching out to you with deals, and even how to get paid in this industry without ever touching a mic. And nah, it's not too late. People love to say the wave passed. It didn't. New artists and new hustlers are blowing up every single day. And the ones eating are the ones who started now instead of waiting. It's only $39. That's a few cups of coffee for a blueprint that can change how you move in this game forever. Links in the description bio. Go grab it. Then let's get back to the video. Yo, what's good, fam? Welcome back. Today we are going all the way in on how Diddy went from $1 billion empire to watching that empire come apart. The businesses, the brands, the deals, and everything that unraveled. Let's get into it. Sean John Combs grew up in Harlem, New York, raised largely by his mother after his father was killed when Sean was just 2 years old. From an early age, people around him understood that there was something different about the way he moved. He was not content to exist inside whatever structure was already built. He was always looking for the angle, always looking for the leverage point, always asking what else was possible. That mentality followed him out of Harlem and into Mount St. Michael Academy, where he played football and developed a reputation as someone with both physical discipline and an unusually sharp business instinct. He enrolled at Howard University in Washington, D.C., one of the most prestigious historically black universities in the country. And it was there that the music industry pulled him in a direction that no classroom could compete with. He was not dropping out because he failed. He was dropping out because the opportunity in front of him was too real to ignore. The opportunity was Uptown Records, a New York label that was reshaping the sound of urban music in the early 1990s. Combs secured an internship there and quickly made himself indispensable. He was not content to do what interns do. He absorbed everything around him, studied how the business worked from the inside, watched how decisions got made, how artists got developed, how the money moved, and how influence was built and maintained. He impressed label founder Andre Harrell enough to be elevated into a talent director role, which was a remarkable position for someone his age. In that role, he worked directly with artists who would become some of the biggest names of their era. Mary J. Blige was one of them. Jodeci was another. The work he did helping shape those careers was not incidental. It was foundational. It gave him a first-hand understanding of how raw talent gets transformed into commercial success, and it gave him relationships with producers, executives, and artists that would prove invaluable when he decided to build something of his own. That moment came after Combs was let go from Uptown Records in 1993. Different accounts describe different reasons for the departure, but what matters more than the exit is what came next. Rather than finding another label to work for, he launched his own. Bad Boy Records was born in 1993, and it was built on a simple but powerful premise. Combs knew how to identify talent, knew how to build an artist's image and sound, knew how to create records that connected with people at a level that went beyond music into something cultural. The early roster reflected that vision, but it was one signing that transformed everything. The notorious B.I.G., born Christopher Wallace, was already generating serious buzz in New York's underground rap scene when Combs signed him to Bad Boy. What happened next was not a slow burn, it was an explosion. Biggie's debut album, Ready to Die, dropped in 1994 and immediately established him as one of the greatest rappers alive. The combination of Biggie's storytelling ability, his voice, his charisma, and his authentic connection to the streets of Brooklyn created something that resonated far beyond the city. Bad Boy Records was suddenly the most exciting label in hip-hop, and Sean Combs was its architect. The revenue that flowed from Biggie's success, combined with the label's expanding roster, which included Total, 112, and Mace, turned Bad Boy into a commercial machine. Combs was not just an executive collecting a salary. He was an owner, a builder, and he was learning in real time how to convert creative success into lasting wealth. The death of Biggie in March 1997 was a wound that the entire hip-hop community felt. But Combs, operating under the name Puff Daddy, made a decision that would define the next chapter of his career. He stepped into the spotlight himself. The tribute record he released in the immediate aftermath of Biggie's death gave way to a full solo album, No Way Out, which arrived in the summer of 1997. The album went 7 times platinum. It won the Grammy for Best Rap Album. It produced multiple hit singles and introduced Puff Daddy not just as a producer or executive, but as a performer with genuine commercial appeal. The success of No Way Out accomplished something important beyond the sales numbers. It connected his personal brand to the broader culture in a way that made everything else he was building more powerful. People were not just buying his records. They were buying into him as a figure, as a personality, as someone whose taste and vision they trusted. But here's where it gets real. Even at the peak of his music success, Combs was already thinking past it. He understood something that very few artists of his generation understood at the same level. Music careers have a ceiling. Trends shift, tastes change, and the income that comes from record sales is ultimately unpredictable and finite. What he wanted was ownership. What he wanted was equity. What he wanted was to build things that would generate wealth independent of whether any particular song charted or any particular album sold. That mindset is what separated him from the vast majority of entertainers who got rich in the 1990s. And it is what made the empire he built over the next 2 decades genuinely remarkable. The first major move in that direction was Sean John. Launched in 1998, the clothing company was initially seen by some industry observers as another celebrity vanity project, another famous name slapped on a clothing line with no real substance behind it. What it turned out to be was something entirely different. Sean John became one of the defining streetwear brands of the late 1990s and early 2000s. With wide distribution through major retail chains, a dedicated consumer base, and a design sensibility that actually resonated with people rather than just existing as a marketing exercise. The brand moved real product. It competed on shelves alongside established fashion labels and held its own. The Council of Fashion Designers of America awarded it the Menswear Designer of the Year honor in 2004, which was not a token gesture towards celebrity visibility. It was a genuine acknowledgement from the fashion industry that Sean John had earned his place on those racks. Based on what the clothes actually were, the commercial success of the brand was significant. And when Combs eventually sold a majority stake in the company, the transaction generated substantial wealth while simultaneously demonstrating to the broader business world that he was not someone playing at entrepreneurship. He was someone who could actually build a brand from the ground up and make it work at scale. But as significant as Sean John was, it was not the deal that ultimately made Combs a billionaire. That distinction belongs to a partnership he formed with Diageo, one of the largest alcoholic beverage companies in the world. The agreement centered on Cyric Vodka, a French ultra-premium vodka brand that Diageo owned and was struggling to meaningfully grow in the United States market. The deal was structured in a way that was genuinely unusual for a celebrity partnership. Rather than accepting a flat endorsement fee, Combs negotiated a revenue-sharing arrangement that gave him a significant percentage of profits from Ciroc sales in the American market. In exchange, he would serve as the face of the brand and drive its marketing strategy. What followed was one of the most successful brand transformations in the history of the premium spirits industry. Under Combs' direction, Ciro became synonymous with luxury, celebration, and aspirational Black culture. Sales went from roughly 40,000 cases per year to over 2 million cases annually at the partnership's peak. The financial returns were staggering. Financial analysts and business reporters who cover Combs consistently identified the Diageo partnership as the single largest contributor to his billionaire valuation, and the numbers supported that conclusion. He later extended his partnership with Diageo to include De Leon Tequila, further deepening his position in the premium spirits market and adding another revenue stream to an already formidable financial portfolio. Then there was Revolt TV. Launched in 2013, the cable and digital network was built around music news, culture, and live performance content. The idea was simple and rooted in something Combs had understood for years. Owning the platform is more valuable than appearing on it. Most artists spend their careers showing up on other people's channels. Combs wanted to own the infrastructure. Revolt gave him that vehicle. And while it never reached the commercial scale of the Spirits business, it added another layer of ownership to a portfolio that was already one of the most diversified in entertainment. When analysts began calculating the full scope of what Combs had built, the numbers added up fast. Music royalties, publishing rights, equity in Sean John, revenue sharing from Ciroc and De Leon, real estate in Los Angeles, Miami, and New York, a Gulfstream private jet, art collections, licensing deals. By most credible estimates, the total picture placed his net worth at approximately $1 billion. Not wealthy by entertainment standards, a billionaire by the same measure applied to business builders in any industry. He had done something almost no one in his field had done, and he had done it deliberately over 3 decades. Now, this is where we got to address something important, because while the empire was growing and the net worth was climbing, a very different story was developing underneath the surface, one that the public only caught glimpses of for years, but that people inside Diddy's world knew far more about. There was a pattern of behavior that stretched back a long time, and the warning signs were there for anyone paying close enough attention. The earliest public controversy came in 1991, before Bad Boy, before the Billions, before almost everything. Combs organized a celebrity charity basketball game at the City College of New York Gymnasium in Harlem. The event drew a massive crowd, far more people than the venue could hold. And when the situation became unmanageable, a deadly stampede resulted. 9 people were killed. Lawsuits followed, settlements were reached, and Combs moved forward. But the incident planted something in the public record, a question about accountability and the consequences of decisions made in his orbit. That would resurface in different forms for the rest of his career. Then came 1999. A night at Club New York in Manhattan ended with gunfire, a police investigation, and a criminal trial that put Combs and Jennifer Lopez directly in the center of one of the most publicized legal stories of that era. Rapper Shine, signed to Bad Boy and Present that night, was convicted and sent to prison for 10 years. Combs was acquitted on all charges. He walked out of that courtroom free, but the image of him in the middle of another violent, chaotic situation stuck. And people who followed his career closely noticed that a certain kind of chaos seemed to find him repeatedly. But here's where it gets real. The controversies that came before, significant as they were, did not prepare anyone for what started unfolding in late 2023. Because what emerged was not a single bad night or a moment of poor judgment. What emerged was an entire architecture of behavior that multiple people, independent of each other, began describing in legal filings with specific details and consistent patterns. In November 2023, Cassie Ventura filed a federal lawsuit against Combs. Cassie had been one of Bad Boy's most prominent artists and his longtime romantic partner, and the lawsuit was not vague. It was detailed, specific, and covered years of abuse, physical violence, sexual coercion, and control. The lawsuit described a relationship built on power imbalance and fear, with Combs using his resources and influence to manipulate and intimidate. The filing landed everywhere instantly. International headlines trending across every platform. The kind of story that does not stay inside entertainment media but reaches people who had never followed hip-hop in their lives. Within 24 hours, Combs and his team had settled. That speed, which might have been intended to make the story go away, had the opposite effect. Settling that fast told the public that something real was being managed, and the story got bigger, not smaller. What came next was a flood. Dozens of additional civil lawsuits were filed in the months that followed, with plaintiffs describing experiences that lined up with what Cassie had laid out in her filing. The term freak-offs began appearing in legal documents, elaborate, coerced sexual events that Combs orchestrated and recorded, using the footage as a form of control over the people involved. The picture being painted across these lawsuits was not of isolated incidents. It was of a system, a pattern of behavior sustained over many years, enabled by wealth, protected by NDAs, and hidden behind the walls of an empire that had been carefully constructed to project a very different image to the outside world. Then in March 2024, Homeland Security agents showed up at his properties, not process servers with civil filings. Federal agents in tactical gear conducting searches of his homes in Los Angeles and Miami simultaneously. The images circulated everywhere and hit differently than any lawsuit had. This was the government. This was criminal. Whatever had been happening in those buildings was now the subject of a federal investigation, and the evidence being collected was not going to stay sealed forever. The searches signaled that prosecutors believed there was something to find, and the public reaction was immediate and irreversible. Corporate partners started paying attention in a way they had not before. The brand around his name, the brand that every business deal he had ever made was built on, was cracking in real time. In September 2024, Combs was arrested. The federal indictment included sex trafficking charges and charges related to the transportation of individuals across state lines for purposes of prostitution. The freak-offs described in the civil lawsuits were not just morally troubling, they were criminally prosecutable, and Combs had used his resources to facilitate and sustain that conduct over an extended period. The trial was long and covered exhaustively by media around the world. When the verdict came, it was mixed. Combs was convicted on the prostitution-related transportation charges. He was acquitted on several of the most serious counts, but walking out of a federal trial with a conviction is not a win, and the sentence he received included significant prison time. The man who had spent 30 years building one of the greatest business empires in hip-hop history was going to federal prison, and the empire was already gone. The first major corporate casualty was the one that hurt the most. Diageo ended its relationship with Combs, dissolving the partnership that had been the single biggest contributor to his billionaire status for over a decade. Think about what that actually means. The syrup deal was not a traditional endorsement where a celebrity gets paid a flat fee to appear in commercials. It was a revenue-sharing arrangement built on Combs' personal brand and his ability to move the product through his image and influence. The moment that image became toxic, the entire economic logic of the deal collapsed. Diageo was not paying for his name to be on a bottle. They were paying for what his name meant to consumers. When that meaning changed, the partnership had no foundation left to stand on. The Ciroc revenue, the DeLeon revenue, the entire spirits operation that had generated hundreds of millions of dollars and anchored his billionaire valuation was gone. Not renegotiated, not restructured, terminated. And what that meant financially was not just the loss of current income, it meant the elimination of every dollar those businesses would have generated going forward. When you lose a business that size, you are not writing one check. You are losing a revenue stream that compounds over time. Combs also stepped away from Revolt TV during this period, losing influence over the media network that had been a piece of his broader strategy around ownership. Other business ventures faced disruption as the legal situation consumed more and more of his attention and resources. The cost of defending against a federal criminal case is staggering on its own. Add to that the mounting expenses from dozens of civil claims, legal teams managing multiple simultaneous matters, settlement negotiations, and the operational costs of businesses that were losing value as the brand around them collapsed, and the financial pressure becomes almost impossible to fully calculate from the outside. And then the assets started moving. His Gulfstream G550 private jet, a symbol of the lifestyle he had built and maintained for decades, was put up for sale. Luxury real estate holdings were being evaluated. High-value artwork and other assets were being liquidated to address the financial obligations piling up around him. Each of those sales told the same story. The wealth assembled over 30 years was being dismantled piece by piece to cover the cost of what was happening in the courtrooms. The Gulfstream was not just a plane. It was a data point. It told you everything you needed to know about the direction things were moving. Financial analysts who tracked his net worth closely estimated that the collapse was both rapid and severe. From a peak of approximately $1 billion, estimates of his remaining wealth fell to somewhere well below $400 million. And several analysts noted that continued legal exposure, additional civil settlements, ongoing attorney fees, and the permanent loss of major business revenue streams could push that number considerably lower before everything was resolved. The real kicker, though, is that losing a business is not the same as paying a bill. When you write a check to settle a lawsuit, the money is gone, but it is a finite number. When you lose a business that generates $50 million a year, you have not just lost $50 million, you have lost $50 million every year for as long as that business would have operated. Multiplied over a decade, that is $500 million in future wealth that simply no longer exists. That is the part of the collapse that does not fit neatly into a single headline, but that shapes the true scale of what was lost. Real talk, when you step back and look at the full arc of this story, it is genuinely difficult to process. Because what Sean Combs built was real. It was not hype, not smoke and mirrors, not the kind of paper wealth that disappears when the press stops writing about it. He built real businesses with real revenue. He signed the deals, built the brands, hired the people, made the product decisions, and created the marketing strategies that turned Ciroc from a struggling premium vodka into one of the fastest growing spirits brands in the world. He launched a clothing company that won legitimate fashion industry awards and moved real product through real retail chains. He built a record label that defined an era and produced some of the most commercially successful hip-hop of the 1990s. Those achievements did not happen by accident, and they did not happen because of his celebrity. They happened because of his ability to identify opportunity, structure deals, and execute at a level that most people in any industry never reach. And that is exactly what makes the collapse so significant. This was not a fortune built on smoke. This was a fortune built on actual enterprise. And watching it unravel, watching the corporate partnerships dissolve, the assets liquidate, the businesses lose their value as the legal controversies overwhelm the brand underneath them is a reminder of something that business history teaches over and over. Reputation is not separate from business value. It is foundational to it. Corporate partners do not just invest in your products. They invest in your ability to move those products to a public image that resonates positively with consumers. The moment that image becomes a liability rather than an asset, the economics of every deal built around it start to change. And when that image collapses entirely, the deals collapse with it. There is also a broader lesson here about how wealth gets built and how quickly it can be placed at risk. Combs did not lose his fortune in a bad investment. The financial collapse was the direct consequence of legal proceedings that dismantled the business relationships his wealth depended on. The risk that ultimately brought everything down was not a market risk or a business risk. It was a personal conduct risk, the kind of risk that no amount of financial sophistication can hedge against once it materializes in a federal courthouse. At the end of the day, fam, the story of Sean Diddy Combs is one of the most complicated and consequential stories the music and entertainment business has ever produced. On one side of the ledger, you have an entrepreneurial record that genuinely changed what was possible for artists coming out of hip-hop. He proved that ownership was not just possible, but achievable if you approach the business with enough discipline and strategic vision. That legacy is real, and it is not erased by what came after, but it is undeniably complicated by it. On the other side, there are the allegations, the lawsuits, the federal investigation, the searches, the indictment, the trial, and the conviction. There are the people whose stories were told in those courtrooms and legal filings. Those questions are now part of the permanent record, and they cannot be separated from the story of how the empire was built. What's left is one of the most dramatic rise and fall narratives in the history of entertainment. A man who spent 30 years building something extraordinary and then watched it unravel in a compressed and devastating stretch of time. A billion-dollar empire built on music, fashion, spirits, media, and branding that came apart not because of a bad business decision or failed product launch, but because the legal consequences of personal conduct overwhelmed every business relationship that had been constructed around one man's name. The businesses survived as long as the brand survived. When the brand collapsed, the businesses followed. And when the businesses went, so did the billion. What makes this story different from other celebrity downfalls is the scale of what was actually built before everything fell. This was not a famous person losing a sponsorship deal. This was an empire, a real, diversified, revenue-generating empire that took decades of strategic work to construct, coming completely apart because the man at the center of it could not keep what was happening behind closed doors from eventually reaching the light. That is the part of this story that will be studied and talked about long after the courtroom details fade. What are your thoughts on the rise and fall of Sean Combs and what his story says about the relationship between business success and personal accountability? Drop it in the comments. And if you want more deep dives like this one, you already know what to do. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss when we drop.